I was born in a wooden cabin that stood near the edge of a large farm in North Carolina. My earliest memories are not of play or freedom. Instead, I remember the sound of work all around me, the clatter of pots from the kitchen, the call of the overseer in the fields, and the quiet sobs of women at night filled the air where I grew up. I belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Carter, and from the moment I could stand, my life was shaped by their rules. When I was 4 years old, I was given my first duty. The mistress had a new baby, and I was told to watch over it. I was still a child myself, small and unsteady, but there was no question. I was ordered to rock the cradle, to wave away flies, and to keep the baby quiet. I wore a plain dress and a white apron, and I sat beside the cradle for long hours. Sometimes I tried to sing softly to keep myself awake, but I often grew tired. One day, when I tried to shift the cradle, the baby slipped onto the floor. My cry filled the room, and Mrs. Carter rushed in. Instead of comfort, I was beaten for my mistake. That punishment burned into my memory. It was the first time I understood that my life was not my own, and that even small errors could bring pain. After that day, I worked with more care. The baby grew into a lively child, but my place in the household was fixed. I was no longer in the cabin with the other children. I was in the master's house, given small duties but watched closely. At times I longed to run and play outside, but I knew that my life had entered another path. Still, I felt a kind of pride. I believed that if I did well, I could please the mistress and perhaps avoid another beating. That thought stayed with me as I grew older. Before I share the rest of my story, I need to know, where are you listening from? Knowing someone hears me, understands me, gives me strength. My mother, Agnes, was the strongest person I knew. She sewed clothes for the family and for the other slaves. She worked by candlelight when the day was over, her hands moving even when her eyes were heavy with sleep. I was her only child, and her love for me was deep. She held me close when she could, though her time was not her own. I remember the way her face lit with joy whenever my father visited. He was owned by another man and was only allowed to see us twice a year at Easter and Christmas. Those days were the brightest of my childhood. When I was about 6 years old, the master arranged for my father to come live with us. My mother's happiness was like a new light in our cabin. She worked with fresh energy, and my father often lifted me into his arms, calling me his fine girl. For a short time, our family felt whole. I remember one evening when my father kissed me on the forehead and told my mother that I was growing tall and strong. My mother smiled, and for a moment it seemed as if hope was possible. But joy was not meant to last. One morning, Mr. Carter came to our cabin with a letter in his hand. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but his words crushed us. My father had been sold to another master in Kentucky. He was to leave within hours. I still see the scene when I close my eyes. My father held me tightly, then pulled back to look at me as if trying to remember every detail of my face. He kissed my mother again and again, his tears falling on her cheek. He prayed aloud for strength. Then he was gone. The cabin felt colder that day, and my mother's silence told me more than any words could. She had lost her companion, and I had lost my father. My father wrote letters whenever he could. He told my mother that he was working hard, saving money, and dreaming of the day he could return. In every letter, there was a line for me. He asked me to be good, to learn my lessons, and to stay close to my mother. I remember tracing the letters with my finger, not yet able to read them all, but feeling their weight. My mother kept those letters carefully folded, and they became treasures in our small cabin. For years, we lived with the hope that one day he might walk through the door again. But as time passed, that hope grew weaker. He never returned. As I grew older, I was given more tasks. I sewed socks, carried water, and learned to keep the fire alive in the hearth. The mistress often told me I would never be worth much, no matter how hard I tried. Her words cut deep, but I did not let them stop me. I wanted to prove that I could work as hard as anyone, even if praise never came. I often thought of my father's letters, his encouragement to stay strong, and they gave me strength. The Carters had a large family. 6 sons and 4 daughters filled their household, along with many slaves. The house was always full of noise, and the fields outside were crowded with workers. Some children, like me, were brought into the house for tasks. Others stayed with their mothers in the cabins. Even at a young age, I could see the difference in treatment. Those who served in the house were watched more closely, but sometimes given better food or clothes. Those in the fields worked from sunrise to sunset under the harshest conditions. My earliest friendships were with the children around me. Mary Ellen was one of them. She was lively and quick to laugh, and for a short time she made the heavy days lighter. But such friendships rarely lasted. One morning, I saw her dressed in her neatest clothes, standing quietly by her mother. Later that day, she was gone. She had been sold. I did not understand everything at the time, but I knew enough. When her mother cried, she was beaten and told to stop showing sorrow. From then on, I understood that anyone could vanish without warning. The shadow of loss became part of life. At night, when I lay on my straw bed, I listened to my mother's breathing and prayed she would not be taken from me too. I learned to hold tightly to the small things that gave comfort. The sound of my mother's voice, the memory of my father's smile, the warmth of the fire in winter. Those small moments carried me through the days. By the time I was 8, I no longer felt like a child. My hands were rough, my back ached from work, and my heart was heavy with memories of loss. Yet, I also carried lessons. I had learned to rely on myself. I had learned to help my mother when she was too tired to continue. I had learned that smiles could hide sorrow, and that silence often carried the deepest pain. Childhood had been taken from me, but in its place grew a quiet strength. As the years passed, my childhood faded quickly, and work became the center of my life. The tasks grew heavier with each season. I carried buckets of water from the well, bent over the washboard to clean clothes, and spent long hours sewing under the eye of the mistress. My hands grew strong, but they also cracked and bled. I told myself that each day survived was a victory, though I often felt that time belonged only to the master and never to me. By the age of 10, I was sent into the kitchen for longer hours. The fire there never seemed to rest. In summer, the heat pressed against my face until sweat ran into my eyes. In winter, the smoke filled my lungs and made me cough, but I was still expected to stand by the pots. Mrs. Carter spoke sharply when I was too slow, and if I dropped anything, the punishment came quickly. Still, I worked on. I had seen enough to know that no one was safe if they refused an order. My mother remained my anchor. Even when her own tasks consumed her, she found a way to guide me. At night, when the house was finally quiet, she sometimes held my hand in silence. Those moments gave me a strength that the world tried to take away. I watched her face carefully. She carried grief for my father, but she never let it stop her from working. I wanted to carry myself with the same quiet power. One memory stays sharp in my mind. My cousin Henry was about my age, full of energy and always quick to smile. One morning he was dressed in his cleanest shirt and trousers. He looked proud, but I did not yet understand why. That afternoon, he was taken away. His mother was told he was going to town, but she never saw him again. For weeks, she wept openly, calling his name when she thought no one could hear. When the master learned of her sorrow, he had her whipped for it. After that, her face grew still, her eyes empty. I never forgot the way Henry's absence left silence in the cabins, as if laughter had been stolen from us all. The lesson was cruel but clear. We were not allowed to grieve. We were expected to smile, even when our hearts were breaking. It was dangerous to show sadness. The master wanted cheerful faces, not reminders of suffering. So we learned to hide our pain, to lock it deep inside. Even as a child, I practiced that false smile, though inside I longed to cry. I understood that my survival depended on silence. The years between childhood and youth were heavy with more loss. I remember my Uncle Samuel, a tall man with a steady voice. He was often trusted with field work, but he feared punishment more than anyone. One season, after losing a tool, he faced harsh words from the overseer. That night, he did not return to the cabin. Some said he ran into the woods, trying to find freedom. Others believed he met his end in the dark, hiding from those who would chase him. Whatever the truth, he was gone. His place at the fire remained empty, and the family spoke little of him. Silence once again became the only shield we had. By the time I reached my teenage years, I felt older than my age. My back bent with the weight of baskets and water jugs, and my arms ached from endless sewing. I had no childhood left to claim. I had no games, no lessons, no chance to rest. Still, I tried to find meaning in the smallest things. The sound of the wind in the trees gave me a sense of peace. The sight of my mother's face in the candlelight reminded me that love could survive, even here. And sometimes, when the children of the cabin sang together, I felt a brief moment of freedom in their voices. Those were the rare gifts that carried me forward. Life in the Carter household was crowded. The master and mistress had many children, each demanding care and attention. I often carried trays to the table or swept the floors while their laughter filled the room. To them, I was invisible, a pair of hands moving quietly in the background. I sometimes wondered if they even knew my name. Their lives seemed like a different world, one I was never meant to touch. Yet I learned by watching. I saw how quickly they were given everything they asked for, while we begged only for rest. The difference marked me deeply, and I never forgot it. One winter, sickness swept through the cabins. Children coughed through the nights, and mothers tried to soothe them with warm cloths. My mother worked tirelessly, sewing by day and caring for the sick by night. I remember how thin she became during those months, her face hollow with exhaustion. Still, she refused to stop. She said nothing, but her actions told me she was fighting for more than herself. She was fighting for me. I knew that without her, I would not survive. I also knew that I was growing into a young woman, and with that came new dangers. The eyes of the overseer lingered too long, and I learned to move quickly out of sight. I stayed close to my mother when I could, and I prayed silently for protection. There were no safe places, only moments of watchfulness. That awareness became part of me, shaping every step I took. Despite everything, I tried to keep hope alive. My father's letters had slowed, but my mother still kept the ones she had folded in cloth. Sometimes she let me hold them. I traced the words with my finger, imagining his voice. He always wrote that he would see us again, though the years passed without his return. I believed his promise when I was younger, but as I grew older, doubt crept in. Still, I held the letters as proof that he had loved us, and that love gave me strength when the days grew too dark. By the age of 14, I had become part of the household staff in full. I rose before the sun, lit fires, washed clothes, and carried food until the stars were out. I heard the mistress tell others that I would never be worth my salt. Her words were sharp, but I let them fall inside me without answer. I had learned that silence could be stronger than reply. I had learned to work, to endure, and to wait. These were the lessons of survival. As I look back now, I see that those years were filled with pain and loss, but also with hidden strength. Each person who was taken left a mark on me. Each sorrow pressed deeper into my heart, shaping the woman I would become. I learned to stand even when the ground seemed to fall away. I learned to carry grief quietly, without showing it on my face. I learned that life could be taken at any moment, but that love, once planted, could not be destroyed. I am now many years older, and when I look back, I see my life as a long road filled with sorrow, struggle, and survival. My childhood was short, not because of years, but because of how quickly I was forced to grow into work. I was only 4 when I began to care for the master's baby, and from that moment my life was never my own. Each memory from that time comes to me as if it is carved into stone. They do not fade, and they do not soften with time. The face of my father is still clear. I see him holding me close, then pulling back to look at me with pride before he was taken away. I feel the silence that filled our cabin when he was gone. I remember the trembling in my mother's hands when she received his first letter. She held it as if it were gold. Those letters became a lifeline. They told us he was alive, still thinking of us, still hoping to see us again. Every line carried both hope and pain. They were proof of love, but also proof of separation. My mother read them again and again until the paper wore thin. Even now, I can picture her folding them carefully and hiding them as if they were treasure. But he never returned. Each year my mother said perhaps this would be the year he came back. Each season we waited, and each season ended in disappointment. I learned that hope could live for a long time, even when the truth was plain. He died far away, never seeing us again. Still, his words remained, and they were enough to guide me when my heart felt weak. Loss did not end with my father. It was the air we breathed. My cousin Henry vanished when he was still young. My Uncle Samuel left one night and never returned. My friend Mary Ellen was taken suddenly, her laughter silenced forever in our cabins. Each time, grief pressed harder against my chest, but I had to hide it. Tears were not safe. Sorrow was punished. Smiles were demanded even when our hearts were broken. I learned to carry my sadness quietly, to keep it inside where no one could see. That silence was not emptiness. It was survival. Yet even in those years of pain, there were moments that gave me strength. I remember the nights when singing rose from the cabins. Soft voices joined together, filling the darkness with sound. For a few moments, we belonged to ourselves. The songs spoke of longing, of sorrow, and of hope. They lifted us above the chains, if only for a short while. I also remember the way my mother's hand felt in mine. That simple touch told me she was still there, still fighting, still giving me strength. The sound of wind moving through the fields also stays with me. It was free. It was untouchable. And in that sound, I felt a kind of peace. These small things carried me forward when nothing else could. As I grew into a young woman, new fears followed me. The overseer's eyes were on me too often, and I learned to move carefully, to keep out of reach whenever possible. My body was no longer seen as only mine. I knew what could happen, and I feared it each day. I learned to be watchful, to step lightly, to stay near my mother when I could. Danger was always present, and survival meant seeing it before it reached me. Through all of this, my mother was my guide. She did not give speeches or long advice. She taught through her actions. She worked without rest, carried her pain without complaint, and still gave me love when she had little strength left. Watching her, I learned how to endure. Watching her, I understood that even when life seemed unbearable, we had to keep going. Her lessons were not written in books, but they shaped me more than any book could have. When I think of myself in those years, I do not see weakness. I see a girl who bent under heavy burdens but did not break. I see a young woman who carried grief silently, yet found a way to rise each day and keep living. Survival became my greatest act of courage. Each day I remained standing was proof that the Master's world had not destroyed me completely. That truth is something I carry with pride even now. The memories still come to me with painful detail. I hear the whip cracking, the cries of mothers, the sound of silence when someone disappeared forever. But I also hear the laughter of children, the quiet songs in the night, and the whisper of the wind in the trees. These two sides of memory live together inside me. Darkness and light, pain and comfort. Both are part of who I am. I share my story because it is not only mine, it belongs to many. There were countless children like me who lost fathers, countless mothers who carried grief in silence, countless families broken apart. Most of their voices were never heard. They were silenced by fear, by chains, and by death. When I speak, I carry them with me. My words are their words too. Their lives mattered, and remembering them keeps them alive in a way. Looking back, I no longer ask why suffering filled my life. Instead, I ask how I was able to continue. The answer lies in the smallest acts of love that survived even in slavery. My father's letters, my mother's touch, the songs in the cabins, the laughter of a friend before she was taken. These were the sparks of life that refused to be crushed. They were small, but they were enough. I do not deny the sorrow. I do not deny the pain, but I also do not deny the strength that grew out of it. Endurance became my shield. Patience became my tool. Hope, even fragile, became my guide. These qualities were born in chains, yet they shaped the person I became. They allowed me to survive, and they allow me now to tell this story. When I imagine the end of life, I see it as a place of rest, a place where there are no masters, no overseers, no chains. I believe that those I lost, my father, my cousin, my uncle, my friends, have found that place of peace. I believe they are free at last. That thought gives me comfort. It tells me that suffering does not last forever, and that beyond this life there is a world where sorrow cannot follow. Until that time comes for me, I carry the weight of memory. It is heavy, but it is also a gift. It reminds me that I endured, that love survived even in the darkest places, and that life continued even when everything seemed against it. My story is not only about sorrow, but also about survival. And in sharing it, I honor those who could not tell theirs. This is why I speak now. Not to forget, but to remember. Not to hide, but to reveal. Not only for myself, but for everyone who was forced to live in silence. I survived, and so I speak.